Now, let's talk about Agile. So, one question is, well, plan and document was invented to try and make software engineering as dependable as civil engineering. How well does it work? Right? There's a lot of papers you read about how well does it work. And it requires this extensive documentation and planning, and depends on this experienced manager, and he or she gets the credit or blame for the project. What's the alternative model? Can we build it without a strong program manager, without all this documentation? And if we do, how do we avoid it just being hacking? You know, what happened before 1970 where people just got together and started coding? Wouldn't it be great if you could just start coding and that was the best way to build it? Well, I don't want to spend any time planning. I'm going to start hacking right now. And that was the best way. So we already knew that was a bad way. Well, what's the alternative that's not documentation, programmer, manager strong, that works? So you remember from last time these four projects of infamy that we mentioned. Well, there's another 27 of them, and collectively in this article from 2005, they lost $17 billion. So, and they're using plan and document. These aren't projects from the 1960s, right? People are using these projects, so there's things going wrong. And in fact, I found 3 surveys that these pie charts represent of saying how much are on time and on budget. So let me go through them. So this one in 1995 said 1/6 basically were on time and on budget. Half of them were late or over budget, and a third of them were just canceled or abandoned. Right? It was just so bad, like the FBI file case. It's like we're just giving up. Right? And how bad was they over budget? They were over budget by a factor of 3. Right? So over budget or late by factors 3. I think it'll take 6 months. Nope, 18 months. Right? So that was one survey. This second survey of projects was saying only 1/8 were on time and on budget. But that's actually an optimistic view, because about half of these projects, there were about 1,000 projects, half of them were simply some minor enhancements to legacy or just data conversion. About half of them were new development projects. Only 3 out of 500 new development projects, what we were probably thinking of, were on time and on budget. So that's 1%. And this last survey of very large projects, this is 2004, people started using some processes that worked a little better, but still only 10% on time and on budget, 20% were at least 35% late, and the rest of these had major delays or were canceled. All right, well that sounds like this stuff isn't working very well. So one of Armando's and my favorite quotes is Ramon Perez, which is not somebody who's quoted every day in computer science classes here, is if a problem has no solution, it may not be a problem, but a fact. Not to be solved, but to be coped with over time. So maybe this planning thing leads to problems that or change is what's causing the problem, and we have to cope with it. So a dozen years ago, a group of people frustrated by these development processes got together, they went to a retreat, a mountain retreat, and came back with word for word what's on the next slide, which they call the Agile Manifesto. And here's what they wrote. We are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others to do it. Through this work, we have come to value, this group, individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation. That's a direct jab at the plan and document processes. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So rather than you sit down there, you come up with a plan, you win the contract, and you have to make the contract. Let's work with the customer to make the customer happy. Responding to change over following a plan. A big part of, well, hey, to make it as dependable as building a bridge, we have to have a plan and stick to it. No, let's respond to change rather than stick to the plan. That is, while there is value in the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. So this is a dozen years ago, they wrote this kind of on, you can imagine this graffiti on the side of the plan and document building, and said we're going to do it differently. Kent Beck was a proponent of this, and he has a version of Agile which he calls extreme programming, or XP. So what did he say? He said basically if things are good, let's do it more extreme. So if short iterations are good, then make them as short as possible. Let's do days or weeks, not months or years. If simplicity is good, then always do the simplest thing to work. Don't anticipate complexity. Just do the minimum thing you have to do to get done. If testing is good, let's test all the time. In fact, let's write the test before we write any code. You're not going to be able to write code without tests. And finally, if code reviews are good, Let's do code reviews all the time by programming in pairs and constantly looking over the shoulder. So this was a big change from the plan and document methodology. And in fact, Agile embraces change as a fact of life. It does continuous improvement versus these phases like we saw in the waterfall model. And the basic idea is developers are continuously refining a working but incomplete prototype until the customer is happy. And you meet with the customer every week or two. So this continual loop of working with the customer. And then Agile emphasizes what's called test-driven development. This is where you write the test before you write the code, and we'll talk about that. We do user stories, and we'll talk about that in a couple of lectures. But basically, you cooperate in an informal manner with the customer to see how you're going to use this software. And velocity is the way we're going to measure progress. We're going to predict performance by how you've done in the past. And here is the Agile kind of flow chart that's from the book. The book is in two parts. Part one is about software as a service. Part two is all about Agile. So we start off talking with the customer, behavior-driven design and user stories. That's getting at a high level of design. Then the implementation, test-driven development. We measure progress and velocity. We deploy it to the cloud. The customer takes a look at it, right? Talk to the customer again. So you're going to go around this loop 4 times in this class for the projects. Now, what about legacy, the number one requirement from those half dozen leading software companies? Well, we're going to do a legacy assignment, and it turns out the same methodology works well with legacy. And then design patterns, architecture is another important software engineering idea, and we'll cover that in another insert in there. All right, so that's what was going on. That's kind of the context about Agile, what it is. What was the reaction to Agile when it came out a dozen years ago? It got a strong allergic reaction from the intelligentsia of the software engineering community. So here's one quote. This is what somebody published. What did they say behind closed doors? I don't know. But this is what they wrote in papers, in magazines, right? Agile is yet another attempt to undermine the discipline of software engineering. It is nothing more than an attempt to legitimize hacker behavior. So not only did people write articles, people wrote whole books about it. There's a 400-page book that came out in 2001 or 2002 that says Agile is a bad idea. And here's, in 400 pages, our argument against it. So it got people's attention. But what about today? Today, it worked. It's an accepted practice. We looked at a survey of 66 software engineering projects, and most of them use Agile, even though they were doing it in distributed environment. One of the textbooks in this area actually not only covers Agile early now, came up with a set of questions that say when we should use Agile, when it's a good idea or not. So basically a yes means use, plan, and document, and a no is Agile. So do you have to do a specification? Are there no customers? Is it going to be really large? Is it going to be complicated real time? Is it going to have a long product lifeline? Are you using lousy tools? Somehow if you use lousy tools, you need good tools for Agile development. Is the project team geographically distributed? Is it part of a culture that is document-oriented, maybe at a civil engineering firm or something? Are the team bad programmers? If you have bad programmers, you should use plan and document. And is it subject to regulation? So it has to follow the certain laws that apply. So basically, if you think about what we're teaching, the answer is almost always no. There's virtually none of these questions for which the answer is yes, which is why we're going to emphasize Agile in this course.